Hi everyone, I'd like to welcome you to the 13th content webinar. We're almost at the end of the nano degree. The last due date is on the 23rd of June, which is almost 2 weeks away. Now, 2 weeks might seem like a big amount of time, but in fact, it's not that much, especially for programming. Most of you have already completed projects which are due, and that's fantastic. Congratulations on that. Keep the work going. You're almost there. There's only a single project left until graduation, and you have ample time to get it done before the deadline. Now, I know that in the past I have said that these deadlines are soft. Well, this time around, though, that's not the case. This is the only deadline that you have to meet. Actually, you have to have completed all of the projects before this day, so before the 23rd of June, to ensure that you will graduate. If you have any projects lying around that are still not completed, it's best to finish them up as soon as you can, so as to be able to start work on the final project and ensure that you will graduate in time. The final project, as you may have noticed, is a lot harder than the previous ones. The level of difficulty is something like the memory game project, and you do remember that was a bit daunting and difficult to complete. This one's, well, a bit similar, but it can be actually a bit harder because you have additional things like the service worker to construct on your own, which is not that easy. That's normal actually, because this is the final project. I mean, that's path to graduation, so it makes sense that it's the most difficult. Actually, this is the first app you're going to build. It shows a list of restaurants in different areas of New York. If you're a fan of New York or America like I am, it's gonna be a bit fun to learn what kind of restaurants you can explore if you're over there. It's your job to make the layout nicely, so to structure the layout nicely, to make sure that there is a running service worker, like I mentioned, to cache all the site's assets, so all the site's files, and of course that Udacity have provided. Also, you have to make the site responsive, not to forget that. Speaking of API, actually, that's the topic of today's webinar. We will explore the API that you have to use in this project, the Mapbox API, to be specific. Getting started with APIs as beginners is not that easy, actually. It's kind of hard to understand what they actually are, how we make use of them. So thankfully, in this project, there is a minimum configuration needed regarding the API. So you'll only have to modify two things, actually, lines of code to be finished with the. But we'll have a demonstration. So I'll provide a demo how to use the Mapbox API and render a map on your future projects. Of course, I've made a presentation for reference as I am explaining to you, which I'm going to share after the webinar. Also, there's a list of links at the end of the presentation with additional information about the topics if you want to delve into more details. So I think we should get going. Yeah. Let me share the screen with you. There we go. This is our agenda. First off, we'll start with explaining what Mapbox is. it's good to have some background knowledge on the company that actually powers the API, who they are, what they do, those types of things. After that, we'll explain what an API actually is. APIs have become an indispensable part of the web nowadays, and it's crucial that you get an understanding of what they are and how they're used. If you plan on working professionally as a web developer, or any kind of developer for that matter, it's essential that you understand how to interact with and even build your own APIs. In If you're a bit more experienced and skillful developer, you can write an API for your own use, and having that kind of skill will really boost your desirability as an employee. So it's good to know about APIs, how they're structured, how they're built. Bear in mind, it's not easy to construct an API. Research this topic before you can build your own API. After we discuss this, we'll take a look at the tools that Mapbox has to offer. As you will see, Mapbox provides a wide array of services that are useful across a whole spectrum of different industries. After we discuss that, we'll move on to the API that you'll actually be using to display the maps in your project. Like I said, you'll only get a distant taste of what it's like to work with an API during this project. And that's why I encourage you to get as much practice as possible with APIs, because like I said, if you plan on working professionally, you will have to work with numerous APIs on your projects. And of course, after the presentation, if we have enough time, I will do some kind of demo actually on how to get started with Mapbox APIs, just to show how that's done. And of course, I'll share with you the project files so you can examine the code more closely. Finally, I've assembled a list of resources for you to get further knowledge on these topics. There's plenty of information online about APIs, about Mapbox. So a simple Google search should be enough to, to get you up to speed with these topics. And that's actually the agenda. So let's get started with the first topic. Let's see what Mapbox is all about. Here's a very shallow explanation of what Mapbox is. As you can see, it's a live location platform. Well, that does not bring much clarity to the table. In more simple terms, it's a company that offers location services for websites and applications. So if you're designing a website for a company of any kind, actually, most probably, they'll want to have their address listed on it. This is a perfect place to put some kind of map to make it easier for a user to find the location to find the exact location of the company. This is where Mapbox comes in. It has numerous servers that have data about all sorts of locations, and all that data is available to you for use through their API. So you might be thinking, what about Google Maps or Apple Maps? Isn't this exactly what they're also used for? And yes, actually, it is. In fact, these three companies, or these three, I don't know, services, are the main competitors in the software location industry. It's up to you to choose which one you want to use. And in the final project, it is explicitly stated that you can use Google Maps if you want to. Just bear in mind that there is no best choice. All three of the As you can see from this figure here, Mapbox holds its own in the race with Google and Apple, which is a formidable achievement. I mean, not many companies can go head-to-head with Google and Apple's products and actually hold their own. So more than 1.2 million developers worldwide use Mapbox services in some kind of way. Um, and that, of course, means that the amount of users that consume the work of 1.2 million developers is going to be a lot. And use a map that is powered by Mapbox. I've put all these figures here just to show you that Mapbox is not some kind of niche company with a shadowy product. Actually, Mapbox holds its own and provides a good service for its users. This slide contains information about the different industries that make use of Mapbox. I have only listed 6 of the biggest industries. There are many more. You can see all that information on Mapbox's home site. So, as you can see, Mapbox successfully adapts to the need of industries like real estate, business analytics, travel, and even the government makes use of its services. So, the app that you have to build falls in the travel sector because we're talking about restaurants and where to find them. So, that's normally something you do when you're traveling abroad. Um, Here's a list of the biggest customers that Mapbox has. You're probably familiar with most of them. You have CNN, Snapchat, IBM, National Geographic, and even GitHub. So it's always nice to know that some powerful commercial giants are part of the community that is using your product, is using the product that you plan on using for your own projects. As you may remember, I mentioned a few webinars ago that every time you consider a new technology or some kind of tool to use in your project, it's best that you check whether it has a big user community, because that way you can find information about bugs and features only if you have a massive community behind the product that you're planning to use. It will be very easy to get started and equally as easy to find solutions to any problems that you might encounter while you're using the product. This is exactly the case with Mapbox. You can simply go online and find tutorials, bugs, bug fixes at numerous locations, so it will make a lot more faster and pretty easy as well. So now that we know what's that will sorry now that we know that we make use of Mapbox through its API, let's have a look at what it is. An API is code that allows two separate pieces of software to communicate with each other. So imagine that you have built an app for making a list of things to do. That's a pretty popular um, task that teachers want people who are trying to learn web development to build. You have numerous online learning platforms that encourage you to try and build a to-do list. So it's nothing new. Basically, it's a to-do app. I'm sure you've seen many of these apps for mobile. This app is simple enough. You have some basic functionality like creating a task, removing a task, editing a task, and probably getting all the tasks that you have to do. These tasks need to have somewhere to live, so this is where the server comes in. we will store on and get our tasks from the server. Now, if we have a server and we have our app, we have to have some kind of mediator, some kind of middleware that connects the two pieces. For our app to communicate with a server, we need an API. The API is what the app that you have built will use to connect to the server and do what you want with the tasks that you have created. You can think of it like this. The API is part of the server, and the server the gatekeeper to grant you access and give you the requested data. So that's essentially what an API is. Here's a more graphic example of what I mean. Notice how we have our app right here in the center. And that app receives different data from three separate sources, here, here, and here. These sources are the servers. Notice the blue drawings here. These are the servers. This is the database here, here, and here. They are highlighted in blue, as you can see, and notice how the green figures right here represent users that communicate some kind of data right here. When they communicate this data, it goes straight to the server and is stored there. Finally, we have the red parts of the diagram, so the sources that lead directly to our app. These are in fact the APIs. The APIs receive the requested data from the database on the server and pass it on to our app. And that's actually it. That's all an API is supposed to do. It is the link between your application and the server you're trying to communicate with. Well, you might be thinking, how is this actually implemented in terms of code? Well, every single API has a documentation. This documentation is essentially the exact same thing to your readme.md files. The same way that you provide instructions about your projects and how to run them, what they exist, how they're built. That's essentially what a documentation is. Every single API has documentation. This documentation consists of the rules that you must follow to establish the connection between your app and the server. Essentially, the APIs provide us with functions, so normal JavaScript functions, that we can call to make some kind of request to the server to do something with data. We use HTTP protocols with these functions, so it's best to know the basic types of HTTP protocol requests. Sometimes we may have to specify some additional configuration to our request to better express exactly what piece of information we want to receive or exactly what we want to do with data that we get. Like I said, every API has its own documentation, which you'll have to go through in order to understand how you're going to communicate with the server. In recent years, there has been an increased effort to standardize the way APIs are constructed. This is done so as to minimize the time expenditure that developers have to spend on understanding how a specific API works. Maybe sometime in the future, communicating with APIs will be fully standardized, standardized, which will allow us to approach this part of software development in a much more relaxed way. I've put a bit of text here, so let's read through it. Defines the correct way for a developer to write a program that requests services from an operating system or other application. APIs are implemented by function calls composed of verbs and nouns. The required syntax is described in the documentation of the application being called. And essentially, we talked about all of this. So let's move on to the next slide. Here are the three basic types of APIs: local APIs, web APIs, and program APIs. This is a bit of a technical part, which it's not absolutely necessary to know all this, but let's go through it just so we have this knowledge. External APIs, as they're called, are published internally for use by the company's developers to improve its own products and services. Private APIs are not exposed to third parties. Like I said, private APIs are something that you can do yourself. They're not usable by no one else besides you. They're just functions that are widely used across your project, and you can simply write them once and export them so you can use them in different locations of your application. That's what a private API is. Public APIs, or open APIs, as they're also known, are published publicly and can be used by any third party. There are no restrictions on these APIs. That's exactly what Mapbox is. It's a public API. Any third party, so us, can use it without any restrictions. Partner APIs can only be used by specific parties with whom the company agrees to share data. Partner APIs are used within business relationships, often to integrate software between partnering companies. So this is more of a commercial API, which the two companies or more actually agree upon a certain set of terms, and the company that's built the partner API bestows the other companies with this API so they can use it. So APIs may be further classified as local, web, or program APIs. Local APIs are the original form from which the name came. They offer operating system or middleware services to application programs. Microsoft's .NET APIs, the TAPI, so the telephony API, for voice applications, and database access APIs are examples of the local API form. So if you want to know more about local APIs, you can check out Microsoft's .NET API, the telephony API, and the database access APIs. Web APIs are designed to represent widely used resources like HTML pages and are accessed using a simple HTTP protocol. Any web URL activates a web API. Web APIs are often called REST APIs. REST stands for Representational State Transfer. Also, these web APIs are called RESTful because the publishers of REST interfaces don't have any data internally between any don't save actually any data internally between requests. As such, requests for many users can be intermingled as they would be on the internet. So program APIs, the final division of APIs, are based on remote procedure call, RPC technology that makes a remote program component appear to be local to the rest of the software. Service-oriented architecture APIs, such as Microsoft's WS series of APIs, are program APIs. So if you're interested more in learning about program APIs, you can check them out. So these three are the types of APIs that exists. For now, we'll only care about the web APIs. The others are a bit complex, and we don't really have enough time to study them right now. Moving on, you should know that almost every big digitized company has its own API. Here are some of the biggest companies out there that have their own APIs. You can embed YouTube videos in your apps by using YouTube's API. You can load account details or browse through a small version of both Twitter and Facebook using their APIs. And of course, as I'm sure you've already seen, you can place a map on your website using Google Maps' API. That's something that you can do with Mapbox as well, and so there's more than one way to skin a cat, as I'm sure you've heard. Like I said, pretty much every big company has an API built into their servers, and most of the time it's free, so you can unleash your creative ideas and make them work using various APIs. So enough about APIs in general. Let's see what Mapbox has to offer us. Mapbox has a range of tools that help us design the user experience we're trying to create. These are the main tools at our disposal. Obviously, we have the maps, which allow us to place a smooth real-time map on our website or our web app. We have navigation, which is Mapbox's algorithm for finding the way to your desired destination. This is essentially finding the destination in the smallest amount of time or distance, depending on the user's preference. Atlas allows you to create your own space and provide navigation for it. This could be your own home, so if you had a large house, you could need navigation or some kind of location tracking to find your way around it. So if you're the owner of a factory, for example, you could make an on-premise navigation service for workers to find their way around easily. So this is kind of like a 3D model of some kind of building that's not included in the street. So there's no way for Mapbox to find and navigate you through it. So you have to do this on your own. Bear in mind that this is extremely difficult, so you will need some skilled developers to make this happen. But there's plenty of them around, and I'm sure you'll become one of them soon enough. So the Atlas service or the Atlas tool helps you create navigation and location services for your own premise, so your own location. The search tool allows you to search for an address and get the exact coordinates of the place and get the exact route that you need to take to get there. And finally, the Studio service or the Studio tool allows you to design your personal map that looks nothing like users have ever seen. This feature is what sets Mapbox apart from Google Maps and Apple Maps. The other two don't really have as much customization as available to them. You can customize in Mapbox. You can customize anything from the way how streets look to the landmark icons, the fonts, so pretty much everything. And these six or actually five are the tools that are available to us when using Mapbox. So as you can see, Mapbox is divided into four APIs. These are the maps, the navigation, the search, and the accounts API. We use the Maps API to actually display a map on the page. We use the Navigation API to provide users with the option to receive a route from where they are to their point of interest. The Search API provides customers with the ability to search for locations within our app and get the adequate search results that they want. So and finally, the Accounts API allows us to browse Mapbox's user database and search for a particular user or set of users. I don't really know why anyone would ever use this service, but it's there if you ever need it. So you can browse the accounts, you can perform a search for some kind of location, you can get navigation, and you can see the map. That's essentially what Mapbox has to offer you, and that's not all that different from what Google Maps and Apple Maps have to offer. As I'm sure you know by now, we're only concerned with the Maps API, and that's exactly what we are going to discuss right now. These are the three features listed on Mapbox's website when you go to the Maps API section. So I've extracted that this simple graphic so as you can get a truthful description of what features the Maps API has to offer. Um, you can see that Mapbox use data from all kinds of sources from more than 130 places to get the most precise map. So their Maps API services over 5 billion requests per day, which is immense. I mean, there are 7 billion people in the world, and here we're talking about 5 billion requests per day. This is a lot. Also, here you see yet more famous companies that make use of Mapbox's API. Adobe, the weather company. So the list of famous companies continues growing. The feature I already mentioned to you, Mapbox has customization and cartographic design that is superior to those of Google and Apple's APIs. You can really get creative and design yourself a map that really fits in with the surrounding content instead of just being slapped awkwardly in the middle of the page.